On December 24, 1985, the Goldmark family were preparing for Christmas Eve, getting ready to host a dinner when they heard their doorbell ring. They thought one of their guests had come early, but they were wrong. That was the last time anyone would answer that door. When their guests did arrive, they walked into a house painted in blood, the family tied to chairs, handcuffed, heads bashed in and stabbed. They didn't have any enemies. No one could have imagined something like this happening to a sweet neighborhood family. But it did. And today, we're going to piece together the timeline of what really happened on that fateful night. The Goldmark family seemed to have it all, or at least, that's what everyone around them believed. Charles Goldmark, a well-respected lawyer with a knack for winning cases, and Annie, his supportive wife who juggled a teaching career with raising their two sons, Derek and Colin. They lived in Madrona, one of Seattle's more upscale neighborhoods. From the outside, they were exactly what you'd expect. Two bright, well-behaved kids, a beautiful house, and parents who appeared to have it all together. But the Goldmark family had a political past that would be their undoing, and not even because of them, because of someone else's idea of them. In 1962, Charles was a freshman at Reed College in Portland, a school known for its progressive reputation. At the same time, his father, John Goldmark, was running for re-election as a state representative in Washington. But things took a dark turn. Two local newspapers published stories accusing John of being a communist sympathizer. It's something that happened every day. Influential. Ashley Holden, editor of the Tonasket Tribune, claimed John was part of a monstrous conspiracy to remake America into a totalitarian state. Holden and his allies spread rumors through newsletters and articles, and even pointed to Charles getting an admission at Reed College, which had recently hosted a communist speaker, and his mother, Sally Goldmark's brief membership in the Communist Party years earlier. Sally had joined the party during the Great Depression when she was young and struggling. She believed in its promise to help those in need, but left the group after meeting John, who was strictly anti-communist. Despite this, Holden and his supporters twisted her past and used it to fuel a campaign that painted the entire Goldmark family as un-American. The accusations stuck. John lost the election, failing to even secure his party's primary nomination. But the Goldmarks weren't about to let the lies go unanswered, so they hired attorney William Dwyer to clear their name and filed a libel lawsuit against Holden and his collaborators. Hollywood figures who had been targeted with similar accusations testified in support of the Goldmarks. Charles even took the stand to defend his school, saying it was far from having anything to do with communists. The Goldmarks won the case. The judge awarded them $40,000 in damages. But lies don't just disappear so easily. The accusations were passed along over the years, and they made their way towards an anti-communist group known as the Duck Club. By 1985, the old rumors made a comeback, and they would reach the wrong person at the worst possible time. David Rice was a man who believed the United States was on the brink of invasion by foreign troops, allegedly controlled by a Jewish-led communist conspiracy. He thought South American and Korean soldiers were stationed at the borders, waiting for orders to strike. Rice also believed the government couldn't trust its own military to attack American citizens, so it relied on these foreign forces instead. In his mind, it all tied back to a larger plan for a one-world communist government, and he needed somebody to blame. These ideas weren't his own. Rice was heavily influenced by Gordon Jack Moore, a former Army colonel who traveled the country warning about the threat of communism. Moore's speeches and writings appeared in far-right newsletters, some of which circulated in Seattle. Rice treated Moore's words as gospel. And so, Rice came to see the Goldmarks as state enemies, and everything he believed was destroying America. Coincidentally, John also had a big role in Washington state politics. He was a 3-term state representative from Okanogan County, while Sally had a controversial past as a former member of the Communist Party in the 1930s. But the damage had already been done. Rice admired Moore so much that he called him after reading one of his articles. Moore's words gave him a purpose, which was something he hadn't felt in a long time, with one failure after another. Born in Durango, Colorado in 1958, he was a loner who dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. He joined the Navy but didn't make it through boot camp. He got married and had a son, but his wife left him. Even when he found steady work as a welder, it ended with a layoff. By 1982, Rice was in Seattle, living out of his car or staying in shelters. Things changed when he met Ann Davis, a 40-year-old naturopath. They started a relationship, and Rice moved into her Capitol Hill apartment. Soon after, Ann introduced Rice to a local group obsessed with anti-Jewish and anti-communist conspiracies, the Duck Club. Its leader, Homer Brand, was an ex-Boeing employee who didn't trust the government and was equally as paranoid as Rice. Meetings often featured things like Moore's writings, and the group's ideas fueled Rice's wild ideas. He felt like he had a role to play for the first time in his life. The Goldmark family came up in conversation at one meeting, and they were linked to the old rumors of their communist ties. So Rice looked them up at the library and read about John, a former state legislator who had been falsely accused of being a communist. But Rice somehow confused John with his son, Charles, and became fixated on the idea that Charles was a communist leader. By the fall of 1985, Rice had now started following the Goldmarks. He staked out their house twice and even went to Charles's office to see him. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, like the fact that John had been dead for years, Rice convinced himself Charles was a communist. And so, Rice put his plan into motion in December. With Davis out of town, he tested a bottle of chloroform on himself for 6 months straight, trying to figure out how long a person would stay passed out when they come in contact. He realized the longest time frame was about 20 minutes. He felt like that was all the time he needed to do what he needed to do. So, he bought a fake pistol and 2 pairs of handcuffs. He was ready to act. After Reed College, Charles served as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army before earning a law degree from Yale in 1973. By the mid-1970s, Charles had settled in Seattle, co-founding his own law firm. But Charles was also involved in Washington state politics, serving as legal counsel to the Democratic Party and playing a key role in Gary Hart's 1984 presidential campaign. What few realized, however, was that Charles's family history ended up tearing his family apart. Rice met Charles at a social gathering through Ann's connections at the Duck Club. It wasn't a long or meaningful meeting, but to Rice, it was all the confirmation he needed. The Goldmarks represented everything Rice had come to hate. What he believed was the corrupt communist agenda that had infiltrated American society at the time. Rice's obsession with Charles grew from there. He believed that the Goldmark family weren't just sympathizers, but active agents of communism. Even though there was never really any solid proof of that being the case. The only former communists in Charles's history were his parents, but they died decades before Charles ever crossed paths with Rice. Rice's belief was based on a mix of misinformation from the Duck Club and his own paranoia. He became convinced that the only way to protect America was to get information out of the moles and eliminate them, seeing his violent actions as a mission to stop the communist threat. His plan was to break into the Goldmark house, take Charles hostage, and coerce him to reveal the names of other communist leaders. But that's not what happened. Rice's violent past. Rice's violent personality comes from years of emotional trauma and bad choices. He grew up in a toxic, unstable environment. His father was an alcoholic, prone to violent outbursts towards his mother. Rice saw this abuse firsthand, and by the time he reached his teenage years, had become accustomed to responding to conflict with anger. At the age of 15, Rice's parents separated after years of issues. His mother left his father, but he was left to fend for himself emotionally. His resentment built up over the years, and, by his mid-teens, he was already becoming a problem in school and, more importantly, with the law. Rice's first run-in with the justice system came at 18 years old, in 1991. He was arrested for assault after a violent altercation with a classmate. The incident was serious enough to lead to legal consequences, but not severe enough for going to prison. He received probation, and from that point on, his life went down a downward spiral. Rice struggled to maintain steady work. He jumped from job to job, leaving them after violent outbursts or disagreements with his superiors. His temper became his defining trait. He married his first wife and had a son, but the marriage didn't last very long. His jealousy, controlling nature, and quick temper ultimately led to divorce. He later got into a relationship with Anne, who fed his temper by introducing him to Charles. Rice had now started preparing for what would become the ultimate expression of his rage, planning every detail. Rice was an anti-communist, and his political views were at the center of everything. And everything changed after meeting Charles. Rice's plan didn't happen on a whim. It was methodical, carefully thought out over weeks. He didn't want anyone to fight back, and his target was the Goldmark family because he saw them as part of the system, as part of the people who had betrayed him. Being called a communist was not the only thing that irritated him. He also felt humiliated in front of people he believed he could trust in pain. It was Charles. Despite the horrific attack, he and his son Derek had survived. When the police arrived, they saw a horrifying crime scene. Charles, Annie, Colin, and Derek Goldmark were each brutally attacked. There were handcuffs, chloroform, and signs of a violent struggle. The police still couldn't figure out who did this. It didn't take long for investigators to find clues. Chloroform residue and handcuffs pointed to a killer who had subdued and controlled the family before taking their lives. No robbery meant the motive was personal. It became clear. The killer had to know the family. Then came an unexpected break. Authorities traced a delivery van to the scene. At first, it seemed strange, but soon it became crucial. The killer had posed as a delivery man to gain access to the house. Following his movements revealed a timeline and interactions with the Goldmarks, all pointing straight to Rice. The aftermath. When Rice was arrested, the investigation turned darker. He initially tried to deflect any suspicion, but he eventually broke down and confessed to his crimes. In his confession, he revealed that he'd convinced himself the Goldmarks were communist sympathizers. This was fueled by extremist groups like the Duck Club that led him to believe Charles was working against the country, and his mother's ties to communist parties in the past only fed his suspicion. His confession showed his cold, calculated hatred. Rice described how he meticulously planned the attack, believing that he was eliminating a threat to the country by killing the Goldmarks. Despite his lawyers pushing for an insanity defense, Rice was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. A decade later, that sentence was reduced to life in prison without parole. One of the more eye-opening moments in the trial came when clinical psychologist Kenneth Muscatel weighed in. Hired by Rice's defense team, Muscatel sat down with Rice for 5 sessions, each about 2 hours long. His report wasn't pretty. Rice showed schizoid and paranoid symptoms, and he heard voices that forced him to act. But according to Muscatel, that wasn't the trigger for the murders. Muscatel pointed to something else: Jack Moore's writings and the influence of people in Rice's life. Ann Davis and Homer Brand from the Duck Club. Rice has also admitted himself that he first learned about the Goldmarks at a Duck Club meeting, and this was where his paranoid fears about an imminent communist threat began. As Muscatel put it, Mr. Rice didn't come up with these ideas on his own. He was part of a group that not only believed in them, but validated them, treating them as rational and crucial. That hit hard for those close to the Goldmarks, but could it all have been avoided if Rice never went to the Duck Club in the first place? We would love to know your thoughts in the comments section. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.